As fast as loft parties and discotheques opened up post-Stonewall, rock venues closed down. The Scene in 1969, the Electric Circus in 1970, the Fillmore East in 1971. The Village circuit was reduced to booking inoffensive singer-songwriters or comfortably mainstream cover bands, its familiar faces of the early 60s scattered far and wide. Bob Dylan, Peter Yarrow and other former folkies to Woodstock. John Sebastian and Phil Oakes joining the migration to Los Angeles. Al Cooper, kicked out of his own group Blood, Sweat and Tears, left for the United Kingdom, while the Rascals broke in half with Penn poised over a lucrative new deal with Columbia and would never have another hit. Lenny Kaye, a budding rock critic and guitarist who moved over from New Jersey to attend NYU in 1967, recalled of playing for 6 weeks at the bitter end in 1969. You knew you weren't in the center of action. All these clubs were coming to the end of their lifeline. Kaye took a job at Village Oldies on Bleecker Street and in 1970, in the spirit of nostalgia, wrote a story on the a cappella doo-wop groups of South Jersey and Philadelphia for Jazz and Pop magazine. Soon after it was published, Kaye, living at the time with Lisa Robinson, another rising music journalist, and her husband, Richard, a record producer, received a phone call from the Robinsons' friend, Patti Smith. She had read the piece and, as a product of the Philadelphia South Jersey region herself, wanted to express her gratitude. Kaye knew about Smith from Max's Kansas City, where she stood out, in his words, as quite striking, quite ectomorphic, very beautiful and cool, having fashioned her look on Keith Richards, common enough among the boys of the era, unique among the women. What was that? Smith usually travelled in the company of the rising gay photographer Robert Mapplethorpe, with whom she had made friends on her arrival in New York in 1967 and taken to living with at the Chelsea Hotel in 1969, where friendships also blossomed with Jim Carroll, a local poet, and a host of others who rendered the Chelsea a constant party. Along the way, Smith cultivated a fixation on two tragic French symbolist poets, Arthur Rimbaud and Paul Verlaine, and began to write poetry herself. Smith and Kaye became friends, hanging out after hours at Village Oldies, dancing around the store to vintage 45s. When Smith landed her first major poetry gig at St. Mark's in the Bowery on February 10th, 1971, she asked Lenny Kaye to accompany her on guitar. The pair played Mac the Knife, it being the lyricist Bertolt Brecht's birthday, and a few songs they put together in a hurry. And Smith read some of her poems, including one called Oath, with a provocative opening line that Jesus Christ died for somebody's sins but not mine. And that was it, said Lenny Kaye. What we were doing was so unusual that there was no sense of what actually you would do with it or where you could play it. It would be nearly 3 years before they would take to the stage together again. Among the many New York scenesters who fled the city at the dawn of the 70s was the actor Eric Emerson, whose photograph on the back of the first Velvet Underground album had led to its initial recall. Warhol had continued making movies after parting company with the Velvets, and Emerson had starred in one of the most successful, Lonesome Cowboys. But now Warhol appeared to be tiring of movies, as he did everything eventually. And Emerson wasn't about to sit around becoming another factory has-been. He accepted an invitation to join the experimental Los Angeles rock group Messiah as its frontman. That he was in the process of becoming a father made no difference. You don't take a creative person like that and say, you have to stay home now, said his then pregnant girlfriend, Elder Gentile, who had been gifted a date with him on her 18th birthday in 1968, for which he introduced her to the back room of Max's. Gentile was not alone in her belief that Emerson was the most beautiful man on the planet, or that he was really crazy, yet imbued with a certain innocence. His new bandmates in Messiah felt much the same way. He had charisma, he had the look, he was flamboyant, said Cecil Coleman, the group's drummer. The group also included the violin player and guitarist. We all loved him right away. And so, in the spring of 71, after an earthquake in Los Angeles dented their confidence, Messiah accompanied Emerson back to New York. Emerson quickly talked Mickey Ruskin into providing them with a gig at Max's, the first since the Velvet Underground. The factory crowd all came out, or at least came upstairs, to see what Emerson had been up to. But although Messiah was visually intriguing, with feathers in the hair and tinfoil on the drum stands, lights in the bass drum, dry ice and candles and skulls, as Coleman described it, no one knew quite what to make of the music. After the show, Paul Morrissey, Andy Warhol's right-hand man at the time, took the band aside and offered an honest assessment. The Velvets closed rock and roll in this city down, he explained. There's no clubs to play. New York is cabaret. It's off Broadway. He was right. A scene set in motion by the directors, writers, actors John Vaccaro, Ron Tavel, and Charles Ludlam in the mid-1960s with their self-descriptive Playhouse of the Ridiculous was taking over the downtown scene as the predominant art form. And why not? Rock and roll had grown boring, conceited, and pompous, and the earnest singer-songwriters of the era, Carole King among them with a multi-million-selling Tapestry, were no alternative. The ridiculous theatre, on the other hand, was colourful, glamorous, flamboyant, and shameless, full of what Lisa Robinson later recalled as grotesque chalk white masks, kohl-rimmed eyes, sparkly spangly lips and eyelids, amazingly coloured wigs of every shape and dimension, shiny G-strings, dildos, extravagant costume jewellery, and glitter. Lots of it. The Jackie Curtis play Heaven Grand in Amber Orbit opened in 1970 with a group of performers in the lobby singing a song, Thalidomide Baby, completely covered in the stuff. As was Curtis's wont, lines for the play were primarily taken from old movies. Plot was never the most important aspect of the ridiculous theatre. The Max's crowd loved it, as they did the sequel, Femme Fatale, for which Curtis hired the director Tony Ingrassia and cast 3 relative unknowns from among the Max's regulars, Patti Smith, Elder Gentile, and the former Stonewall regular and drag queen Wayne Rogers, newly renamed for the Stooges' home turf in Michigan, Wayne County. Also cast in Femme Fatale were Candy Darling and Holly Woodlawn, who, along with Curtis, formed what Wayne County called the Queen Bees of the factory-dominated, self-anointed superstar drag scene. Though it was Curtis, County insisted, who was the smart one, the most intellectual, the most temperamental, and crucially, the first of the glitter queens. County, currently sharing his East 13th Street apartment with Curtis Darling and a rising young photographer, Lee Childers, wrote and starred in a play of his own, World, Birth of a Nation, directed by Ingrassia, which introduced a former Salvation DJ and self-confessed groupie, Cherry Vanilla, to the stage. The lines in World's first scene were all titles of Velvet Underground songs. The highlight, if that's what it could be called, was a scene in which John Wayne gave birth to a baby through his anus. And actually, some of these are on YouTube. I have not seen that scene on YouTube. I think you can see some of Femme Fatale on YouTube. Now, I might actually be at the YouTube channel I have set up. It's great to see Patti Smith and Elder Gentile and all these people together on stage in 1971. Never one to let a culture develop in New York without his own involvement, Andy Warhol decided, in the words of the theatre world, to steal the show. He handed over hours of his tape-recorded conversations with various factory characters and asked Tony Ingrassia to make a plot out of them. The result, Pork, was nonsensical and offensive, proving particularly obsessed with feces. This created great discontent for Bridget Polk, a.k.a. Pork, the title character, who had been recorded by Warhol describing her wealthy childhood in intimate detail. Pork opened at La Mama in May 1971, a few weeks before Curtis's latest play, Vain Victory, in which Emerson took to the stage as one of the actors and singers, covered in glitter from head to toe. His Messiah bandmates, having taken Morrissey's advice to heart, provided the musical accompaniment. Vain Victory, Curtis's first stab at directing, was considered chaotic even by ridiculous standards. Ingrassia's Pork, in large part thanks to Warhol's attachment, was promptly invited to London. In the summer of 1971, the cast and crew members, Tony Zanetta, Lee Childers, Wayne County, and Cherry Vanilla, were among those flown to London, where the performances at the Roundhouse in Chalk Farm were regularly graced by the presence of one David Bowie. Cultural interaction between New York and London has always ebbed and flowed according to the trade winds of fashion, and it was now about to enter a particularly turbulent period of cross-pollination. The 24-year-old Bowie, struggling to escape his one-hit wonder status, that's for Space Oddity, which had hit the charts back in 1969, was just finishing a new album, Hunky Dory, that included a tribute trilogy to a New York City he barely knew from first-hand experience, but which he wrote about eloquently. His Song to Bob Dylan served as a plea to the increasingly distant poet to return to his old self. Andy Warhol demonstrated an intrinsic understanding of that artist's thinking, with clever wordplay on Warhol's preferred method of screen printing. And Queen Bitch was clearly a homage to the Velvet Underground, from Lou Reed-like riff to lyrics about a sister Flo. Befriending Pork's cast and crew brought Bowie a direct link to at least a couple of his lyrical subjects. And when he flew to New York in September to sign a new record deal with RCA, Tony Zanetta duly introduced him to Warhol. Bowie was also fated with a press dinner in his honor on that visit. Lou Reed, newly relocated to Manhattan after his Long Island sabbatical, and Iggy Pop, whose Stooges had just broken up after 2 albums on Elektra, were among the guests. Inspired by the unrestrained, reinvent-yourself, gay, positive glamour of New York, and especially by the characters in Pork, Bowie now created his own androgynous persona, Ziggy Stardust. The following January, he told Melody Maker, Britain's best-selling music paper, "I'm gay and always have been," a statement that, though largely a publicity stunt, Bowie was married and had an infant son, acted as a release valve for the international rock community that had been watching the emerging gay liberation movement with repressed envy. In June 1972, the album, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, was released, launching Bowie's alter ego as a cult of personality. In Britain, they called it glam rock, a trend that soon reached down to the pre-teen set. In America, they called it glitter rock, and though Ziggy Stardust had minimal chart impact at the time, the concept was a difficult sales pitch to the vast expanses of middle America. In New York, it was an instant phenomenon. That same summer, at Bowie's invitation, Lou Reed flew to London to record his second solo album, Transformer. His first, produced by Richard Robinson, that's Lisa Robinson's husband, had been a flop. Among the songs he brought with him was Walk on the Wild Side, for which he spun biographical snippets of the three Queen Bees, Holly Woodlawn, Candy Darling, and Jackie Curtis, along with those of their fellow factory actors Joe D'Alessandro and Joe Campbell, into a loving tribute to the transgressive New York decadence. It was familiar territory for Reed, but Walk on the Wild Side was his definitive statement on this culture and its characters, offering meticulous lyrical detail. The back room in Candy Darling's verse, for example, was that of Max's Kansas City. The Sugar Plum Fairies Apollo was the Harlem venue, and Jackie speeding away was Jackie Curtis, or at one point in the 60s, anyone associated with the factory, on an amphetamine rush to oblivion. In the studio, Bowie and his guitarist and co-producer Ronson afforded Walk on the Wild Side a simple arrangement that enhanced its lyrical intricacy, with both acoustic and electric bass lines, a sax solo straight out of a Harlem corner at midnight, and a chorus of backing singers imitating the colored girls of Reed's lyrics. Upon release in 1973, Walk on the Wild Side received unexpected airplay, and with Reed having adopted the glam look in the interim, slipped into the American singles charts, acquiring classic status not only as a song indelibly associated with the New York streets, but as a glitter rock anthem that celebrated some of that movement's founding figures. By the time it charted, however, New York had a new generation of glitter idols. Cy Kabak, a former racing car driver who made his fortune in air conditioning, had co-owned the Theatre Cabaret at 240 Mercer Street since 1966. In early 1971, after one of the project's more successful off-Broadway plays was forced out because of a leaky roof, he took the venue over from his partner, the Village Gate Art de Lugoff, and set about expanding the two lower floors, there at the back of the Broadway Central Hotel, into a very downtown version of the Upper West Side's Lincoln Center. The 35,000 square foot Mercer Art Center would house, according to its publicity materials, 7 cabaret theaters, rehearsal space, 2 acting schools, editing rooms, construction space for sets, props and costumes, several small bars, a restaurant, offices, and have access to a 1,500 car parking lot. Kabak claimed he was sinking $300,000 of his own money into the project, but not out of altruism. My motive, he said, is to make this a financial success. By the fall of 1971, he had renovated enough space to open up the kitchen, a room intended for experimental art installations, and booked the pianist Michael Shudin, who in turn brought by the band Messiah. That group had settled into a Friday night residency of sorts at Max's, primarily as a means by which Ruskin could send exuberant show-offs like Eric Emerson and their penchant for drunken tabletop stripteases and dances known as Showtime upstairs. Gradually, Messiah had come to realize the exclusivity of this environment. Not everyone was invited into the Warhol scene, said Cecil Coleman. Not everyone made it up to Max's and was let in. And so they talked themselves into a penurious existence at the Mercer, helping Kabak empty the Broadway Central's ballrooms of various debris and construct stages for the theatre spaces by day, in exchange for a practice place by evening, and a performance with Shudin in the kitchen at night. By the time the Mercer Arts Center had its official opening party in November 1971, with a highly rated performance of Ken Casey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in the main theater, Messiah had become the Magic Tramps and were performing a nightly cabaret set with Shudin in the Blue Room. There, Eric Emerson would entertain dinner customers in his leather hot pants, bounding across the stage, sprinkling glitter over the audience to the sounds of the William Tell Overture. Periodically, factory stars like Jerry Miller, Candy Darling, and Jane Forth would sit in on such songs as Would You Like to Swing on a Star? Emerson embarked on an affair with Forth, with whom he soon had another son. None of this suggested the Mercer was a rock and roll club. But that did not stop David Johansen, who knew Emerson from Max's, from asking for a gig. Now, I skipped the thing about the little couple of pages about the formation of the New York Dolls, but we know the New York Dolls. David Johansen, frontman of the New York Dolls, and we're going to get into the New York Dolls. Emerson obliged, and the New York Dolls' first show at the Mercer Arts Center duly took place in June 1972 in the kitchen, opening and closing for the Magic Tramps. Their entourage of dressed-up East Village fans reacted with predictable enthusiasm, and Al Lewis, the Mercer promoter, immediately offered them a Tuesday night residency in the 200-capacity Oscar Wilde Cabaret Room at the far Broadway end of the complex. Their first headlining gig was on June 13th, 1972, almost the exact day that David Bowie's Ziggy Stardust album was released. It would be difficult to exaggerate the impact of the New York Dolls at the Mercer Arts Center. For an entire generation of New York's musical youth, many of whom had attended school in the 60s when anything and everything seemed possible, and who found themselves now stuck in a city where nothing seemed to be happening, the act was a revelation, the experience almost transformative. When I saw the Dolls, I realized you didn't need to be a great musician. It was more interesting if you were cool, said Tommy Adeli, who was inspired to form a band called Butch. His best friend from Forest Hills High School in Queens, John Cummings, was similarly impressed by how great they could be with limited musicianship. Douglas D.D. Colvin, another Forest Hills alumnus, or rather dropout, was equally blown away. Great songs, great energy, wild stage antics, he recalled. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was the best thing in the world. There was no one could compete with it. And of course, you know what those three guys ended up forming as a band. Yet, said Lenny Kaye, who counted himself as a total fan and went to see them almost every week, the Dolls were not these abstract primitivists. David Johansen knew the blues. Johnny Thunders knew how the English stars dressed. They were able to pull all of these aspects of fashion and presentation and energy and amateurism and existentiality in one package. They brought hard rock music back in, said Elger Gentile, who, Emerson having flown the nest, soon became partners with Sylvain, the guitarist. The image in itself that they wanted to be dolls was very attractive to girls. And where the girls go, the boys go. The girls liked them more because they had the balls to dress like this, confirmed photographer Bob Gruen. The Dolls, he said, were very macho guys who were wearing what they were wearing to be more beautiful guys. There was nothing gay about them, but they weren't afraid to seem gay. They weren't afraid to seem effeminate. They weren't afraid of anything. The Dolls' image was not a shock to the group's core audience, those who participated in the ridiculous theatre, gathered around the Bethesda fountain, or hung out at Nobody's. Those who read about David Bowie in the American edition of Melody Maker, and who saw the Dolls as New York's inevitable and natural contribution to a glam glitter revolution. As Lee Childers aptly described it, you didn't just go to see the Dolls, you had to be seen seeing the Dolls. It was an actual participatory thing. Everyone in the audience was just as outlandish as the Dolls were. Except perhaps for Marty Tao, a 35-year-old music marketing executive who stumbled upon one of the group's earliest shows the very night he quit a job at Paramount Records. As far as he had been concerned, at that point in 1972, everybody in America was wearing army coats and earth shoes. Yet here were these guys decked out in leather and leopard skin with bouffant hairdos, black nail polish, lipstick, 6-inch platform boots, chopped jeans, feather boas, armbands, and pantyhose. Peering behind their image, Tao heard what he called loud and hard ghetto music about girls, sex, drugs, loneliness, heartbreak, and the rights of teenage romance. In particular, in Looking for a Kiss and Personality Crisis, he heard the stuff of hit records, something he knew about from his years at the Buddha label. He invited the group to a dinner in the back room of Max's, of course, and came away very impressed with how much they knew about what they wanted to do. He thought, maybe I should look into managing these fellows. Tao called in as his partners a couple of booking agents turned managers who were already working with Elephant's Memory, the holdover hippie freak band that John Lennon and Yoko Ono had picked as their backing group upon recently relocating to New York City. The fact that the managers had also acquired a group called Aerosmith, whose frontman Steven Tyler shared David Johansen's resemblance to Mick Jagger, seemed no big deal at the time. With major management, the support of the downtown scene, and effusive, almost weekly coverage in Melody Maker, courtesy of Roy Hollingsworth, its New York correspondent and American editor, a major record deal might seem to have been in the cards. But, said Marty Tao, labels were afraid of them, didn't know what to make of them, immediately perceived them to be gay. They seemed just a little too wild for the record industry to deal with. They were also, at that point, more exciting on stage than on tape. A demo produced by Tao revealed the group's freely admitted technical limitations. While Sylvain and Thunders acquitted themselves admirably, it was hard not to hear the Iggy influence in Johansen's voice on the song Human Being as pure homage. So when an offer came to play the United Kingdom, where Detroit's glam rock group Alice Cooper had just reached #1 with Schools Out, they jumped at it, heading to Europe in October after 17 consecutive Tuesdays at the Mercer. The initial highlight of the trip was a prestigious show opening for Rod Stewart and the Faces at Wembley's 8,000-seat Empire Pool. The initial low point was a drive to Liverpool to find that Lou Reed, fresh off his musical facelift courtesy of Bowie, refused to let them play, for reasons that may or may not have come down to home turf rivalry. In between, the group acquired a cult following among London's groupies, and the management secured several offers of record deals. And then, on November 7th, drummer Billy Messiah attended a Chelsea soiree without his bandmates, overindulged in quaaludes and alcohol, and passed out. The party hosts, rather than call for help, put him in a cold bath and poured hot coffee down his throat. An unconscious Messiah choked to death. The surviving members, beside themselves with grief, were flown home to New York on the first available flight. Record deals were suddenly moot. There would be brighter days to come, but Messiah's death cast a permanent shadow over the New York Dolls. "We never really got over it," admitted Sylvain, the drummer's closest friend since junior high. His partner at the time saw the collapse for herself. "As much as they tried to keep it together, as much as they tried to protect themselves," said Elder Gentile, "it just drove them into a spiral of destruction." All right, comes the last part. On January 30th, 1973, a four-piece group made its debut at an Irish bar turned rock club, the Coventry in Sunnyside, Queens. The faces of its members coated in lipstick and mascara, in apparent homage to the New York Dolls. The few people in attendance could scarcely have known that they were witnessing the birth of one of the biggest rock groups in history. Time, after all, did not appear to be on Kiss's side. The drummer, Peter Criss, 28 already, had gigged at the Metropole as far back as 1963. Having gotten married that past summer, his childhood friend Jerry Nolan was best man. Criss had joined the bassist vocalist Gene Simmons and guitarist vocalist Peter Stanley in their group Wicked Lester, just in time for the band to get dropped by Epic Records. Yet Kiss represented a new beginning as much as a last-ditch effort. The premise of the band was that each one of us was going to be a star, said Israeli-born Gene Simmons, 23 years old at the time of their debut. All of us trim, tall, white, dark-haired, no blonde guys. It was going to be very sort of defined. Every guy had the same length hair, very much in the mold of the Temptations. But within that uniformity, each member gradually developed his own comic book hero superhero persona, which in time unraveled as the Demon, Gene Simmons, the Star Child, Paul Stanley, the Catman, Peter Criss, and the Spaceman, the newly acquired 21-year-old Bronx-raised guitarist Ace Frehley. Crucially, every one of them wore that character as a mask. The nature of their overstated image was such, said Paul Stanley, that no club would hire us because of how we looked and how loud we played. Not necessarily so. The New York glitter rock scene initially welcomed Kiss as one of its own, the group joining the Brats and Queen Elizabeth at a couple of Bleecker Street loft parties in the spring of 1973. But Kiss soon set their own path. They were perhaps the only New York glitter band of the era not to play at the Mercer, or to open for the Dolls, whom Paul Stanley later dismissed as a great, charismatic-looking band who didn't play very well. Kiss took their musicianship as seriously as their makeup. They constructed ready-made party anthems like Strutter, Firehouse, and Deuce, led by blunt guitar riffs, with Simmons and Stanley's vocals veering into the high-pitched wail that would become a hard rock trademark. Headlining the Hotel Diplomat in July 73, they secured management, and just a week later, at a club gig on Long Island, were seen by Neil Bogart, who invited them to become the first act on his new label, Casablanca. Bogart had been Marty Towers' boss at Buddha, and presumably keeping tabs on the glitter scene, would have known all about the New York Dolls and perhaps been seeking his own version. For sheer force of local popularity, boosted for better or worse by the notoriety following Messiah's death, had finally brought the Dolls a record deal that spring through Paul Nelson, Bob Dylan's old college friend, at Mercury Records. Todd Rundgren, a respected young producer for the band and Badfinger, and recently a hitmaker in his own right with I Saw the Light, on being hired to oversee the proceedings, proclaimed, "The only person who can produce a New York record is someone who lives in New York." Reviewing the finished results in Cream magazine that fall, Robert Christgau wrote, "There has never been a band, not even the Velvets, who have conveyed the oppressively close excitement that Manhattan holds for a half-formed human being the way the Dolls do." Rundgren appears to have achieved his goal. Certainly, New York Dolls was a remarkably confident and accomplished album, the addition of piano and backing vocals helping turn such songs as Personality Crisis, Jet Boy and Trash into instant glitter rock anthems. And the group's New York roots were evident throughout, in Frankenstein and Subway Train, each of which referred to New York directly, and in the appropriation of the opening line from the Shangri-Las, "Give 'em a great big kiss," for the Dolls' own "Looking for a Kiss." As if admitting to New York's changes in the few years since the girl group boom, though, that song then made references to shooting up and looking for a fix. Like the Velvet Underground and Nico, New York Dolls has been hailed over time as one of rock's greatest debut albums, a major influence for future generations of punk, glitter, and pure rock and roll bands. Why then was it perceived as a failure at the time? For one thing, expectations ran almost impossibly high. Such had been the hype from the Mercer residency that little short of a gold record would have satisfied the cynics. The album actually sold over 100,000 copies at the time, but failed to crack the top 100. The group's hard partying lifestyle didn't help. It was a problem for Todd Rundgren in the studio, and if that was something that could be kept relatively quiet, it was less easy to hide Arthur Kane's bandaged hand, which prevented him from performing when the group visited Los Angeles in September. It soon became common knowledge that he had almost lost his thumb in a pre-flight knife fight with his girlfriend, a street girl known as Connie Grip. Nor were the Dolls greatly aided by their choice of album sleeve, on which they splayed themselves across a couch, pouting and dressed like the full-on drag queens. Gay liberation, especially the cross-dressing aspect of it, had not yet pervaded the hinterlands, and record stores and radio stations alike balked at the very sight of them. A tour with Lynyrd Skynyrd had hardly changed those perceptions. When they finally met the youth of the country, Paul Nelson later observed, that youth seemed more confused than captivated. Still, most of that was in the future on the evening of August 3rd, when the New York Dolls opened for the British glam rockers Mott the Hoople at the Felt Forum Theatre at Madison Square Garden. It must have felt a world away from the Mercer Arts Center, just a mile and a half downtown, where the Magic Tramps were rehearsing at 5 o'clock that same evening, when they heard a commotion in the street below. Cecil Coleman went to the window. There were maybe 100 to 200 people shouting. He said, "The building's falling down, get out!" On its Broadway side, the 8-story hotel was indeed collapsing into the ground. 4 dead welfare residents were eventually pulled from the rubble. Most of the Arts Center rooms, being on the Mercer Street side of the hotel of the building, survived the collapse, but city bureaucrats, embarrassed by newspaper reports that some 450 maintenance violations had been filed against the hotel in its last 30 months, took no chances and condemned the entire structure. Cy Kybach was out the several $100,000 he had invested in the Mercer Arts Center, and Manhattan was without the most thrilling arts and performance venue it had known that decade.